Thank you all for coming. In case you didn't know, this is an event for the Chicago Product Management Association. If you were expecting it to be something else, kindly leave over there. Thank you. We have a pretty good turnout tonight. It's not too big, which is good because it means that we actually have people who care about this. You know, there's nothing worse than a networking event where you have a bunch of people showing up who are just kind of there to mope around and are just really disinterested. And that, of course, makes the panelists very sad, so we don't want that. But we don't have as many people, so that's great. So before we get to the topic of tonight's event, I want to thank Lori and wave over there. And Perry, is Perry still here? There he is. For hosting this event. This is a great space. We've done. Chai PMA has worked with Lori for a while. A lot of us who are organizers at Chai PMA know Lori through various means. So thanks for organizing it.
Sounds rather scandalous, but okay.
Lori, get your head out of the gutter, please. There's a few of us here that are organizers tonight. Unfortunately, we don't have our name tag, but if you're Chai PMA organizers, can you kind of wave your hand, please? If you have any feedback for after the event, how we can make it better, how we can make it nicer, talk to one of us. We're always improving. Every event, we're implementing changes that were based on feedback from a previous event. One thing in specific is later on in the event, we're going to ask if anyone's hiring, if everyone's looking. We were told that it's better to do that at the end of the event, so that's what we're going to do. Well, yeah, I mean, just out of curiosity, how many people here are hiring or looking for a new opportunity? I'm just curious, like either or. Yeah, that's about what we usually get. A lot of people come for various reasons. One of them is hiring. So that's all the introductions. Let's get to the topic at hand. So first question is, how many of you have heard of blockchain technology? Heard of it? I'm trying to see if anyone didn't raise their hand. Okay, I thought we had one. That would be really weird if you came to an event about this and did not hear about it. So here's a more interesting question. How many have only heard of blockchain technology as far as its association with cryptocurrency? How many have only really heard about it in that context? Be honest, come on, there's no shame in this. This used to be me for a while. I'm surprised. This is great. How many of you actually incorporate blockchain technology into products that you work on right now? Is there anyone here? We got a few hands. This is nice. I definitely wasn't expecting that. This is great. So great. So it seems like we've got a pretty good crowd. We're pretty familiar with blockchain technology. I mean, what kind of got me thinking about this event and what really led to the creation of this particular topic for Chai PMA? Because usually we discuss things that are very, organization-centric. You know, how to get into product management, how you organize teams, things of that nature. Is that blockchain technology tends to get lumped in as one of those fads, you know. Like when you say blockchain, some people just roll their eyes, kind of like how people used to and sometimes still do roll their eyes when you say, oh, we incorporate AI in our product. I roll. You know what I'm talking about. Or VR. VR is still kind of an eye roll right now. There's no real good applications for it as far as I'm concerned, but that's beside the point. But I find it sad because just like, artificial intelligence and machine learning, blockchain technology is more than just a fad. I mean, yes, you have the whole cryptocurrency thing, and whether it's a fad or not is a subject of debate. I'm sure Taylor would love to talk about it right here.
For hours and hours and hours.
Wait, so would you actually like to talk about it, or is that something that you're forced to talk about?
Little column A, little column B.
Okay, gotcha. Well, we're not talking about cryptocurrency, sorry. Because blockchain technology is like, I don't know, what's a good analogy? To blockchain technology. I'm going to go with cloud. It's a technology. It can be used for many different purposes, and just so happens the most popular application of it is cryptocurrency. So, without further ado, I'd like for the panelists to introduce themselves. Taylor, why don't you start?
Yeah, so thank you, Oleg. My name is Taylor Gerring. I have been involved with the blockchain space for almost 5 years now, which is relatively long. One of the big things I did was go out to Switzerland to help work on Ethereum in the very, very early days. Since then, I've been doing blockchain education. So we do this, this is kind of the camera crew that's recording this as well, Blockchain Institute. We're trying to establish ourselves here in Chicago and talk about real world, tangible, relatable kind of use cases that will actually impact us rather than just the purely value transfer, monetary aspect of things. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
So my name is Robert Elder. I am president of Blockchain News, which is international, but we have headquarters here in Chicago and another office in Amsterdam. I see a few familiar faces, so thanks for coming up and saying hello. I do a lot of these, so it's nice to see the community grow. I'm also a partner at a venture called Token Agency, and we're sort of an advisory firm that helps people launch their products. So. Let's go from there.
Cool. So Taylor, sorry, just one quick question for Taylor.
Sure.
What's the name of the educational website that you currently run?
So we've got a couple of things right now. Blockchain Institute is like the official organization, but we have like kind of this media arm. We bought this domain name a while ago. It was one of the few left with blockchain that was nice and short. It's blockchain, are you ready for this? Not .com, .wtf. Blockchain. You got it. .wtf.
You don't want to tell us all what the WTF stands for? No?
What's the future? That's a great one. Yes, exactly. So we've got social media, YouTube, website, all that kind of stuff. But you type into your browser blockchain.wtf. We make lots of videos, educational things. We're trying to start on the very basics, like what is a block, right? Somebody wants to know this, and then try to build up from there.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's actually a good kickoff to first question. What is blockchain technology? I mean, if you could provide a sort of a simple-ish explanation of what it is.
I'll give a basic technical, the tenets technically, if you want to take the other side of it.
It's like you're bringing stone tablets down.
Yeah. So blockchain technology, I just want to say first and foremost, although new in a sense, builds on other technologies, so building on the shoulders of giants in a sense. Peer-to-peer networking is hugely important, as is cryptographic technology, which we've had both of these for at least decades. And then the final piece for me that was really interesting, and this is the part that like made Bitcoin, was this incentivized validation portion. And I look at those as kind of like the tent poles or pillars, if you will, technologically, which enables it, but it's more than that.
I tell people very simply that blockchain technology is double entry bookkeeping everywhere. So it's immutable, so it can't be changed. It's one of the reasons that it supports cryptocurrency, because it's a digital dollar, if you will, and so you can't double spend that dollar. So it takes the network and a decentralized network that validates that transaction. Or in other areas, and we'll talk about the other areas, but it's not just currency, it's also things like self-sovereign identity. So, you can tell people who you are using a blockchain. For supply chain, it's very, very valuable. The example that's brought up over and over is 5 years ago, remember when Chipotle had an E. coli scare? They couldn't track it because they had too many suppliers. Well, if you had a blockchain in place, you'd be able to tell exactly where the source of that was. Real estate, there are so many applications, but the core of it is one block of information built on another block of information, and that is immutable, it's unchangeable. So that is the power of blockchain.
So, by the way, before I forget, if you look at this link over here, so we're going to be taking questions through Slido. Slido is an app that lets you ask your question digitally, vote on the ones that you want asked, and we're going to try to incorporate them throughout the presentation. So go to slido.com, it's going to ask you for a number to enter, and you'll just enter L243. So before I forget. So, Rob, it's good that you got into the applications of cryptocurrency. So I have a couple questions about that. What are the, not cryptocurrency, dang it, I made the mistake now. What are the applications of blockchain technology? And also, what makes it better than existing applications? Because especially here as product managers, we're not just looking for solutions, we're looking for solutions that are better than existing ones. We're not going to implement blockchain technology just because it's cool.
Sure.
We might.
I was going to say I'm going to quote Jimmy Wong, who's this big personality, or Jimmy Song actually in this arena, and he puts it better than anybody I've seen, which is an existing project that you have. You can't just sort of sprinkle blockchain pixie dust on it. Blockchain will not make your product better. It is expensive. It is hard. But it is also the future. So if people are looking for a way to shoehorn in, AI, blockchain, VR, it is not the solution. It has to be a sort of use case that makes sense for blockchain, whether that's security, whether that's identity, whether that's real estate. It's tough to re-engineer because it's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. So blockchain, it's a tool like any other, and just like you might be able to use a screwdriver to pound a nail into the wall, it's not really what it was designed to do. So in that sense, there's certain use cases where it works really, really well. For the first time, I think this is kind of a magical thing. For the first time since we've had computers copying everything for us, we've actually had a mechanism and tool to enable uniqueness, right? Rather than copying everything, we can make things unique in the digital space. Importantly, without having to place trust into any particular entity, right? And we can talk all day about relationships and trust, and there's a whole social human side of this. But at the end of the day, when you're doing business over the internet, you can't see the person's face, you can't necessarily shake their hand, and in some of those situations, you don't have the trust that you would like to have. And in this case, the protocol allows you to rebuild some of that trust into those interactions.
So can you talk about any specific applications?
Yeah, so
all day long. Go ahead.
yeah, so I think provenance of goods, supply chain tracking, real estate tracking are really, really excellent use cases. Things where you want to know the story along with something over a kind of permanent period of time. I think those are really excellent use cases, especially when the information needs to be shared amongst a lot of stakeholders, some of which may not trust each other. The famous kind of thing is like, why does the title insurance industry exist, right? Title insurance, if you haven't bought a house, exists to protect the fact that the records were all done correctly. In 2018, we're trying to make sure the records are entered correctly, and we all pay a premium on insurance for that stuff. Why? It seems like something that's very fixable.
And I was going to give you a couple of not just use cases but brand names. So I was on a panel in Amsterdam, and now Estonia, the country of Estonia, runs all of its property management, all of the title, off of a blockchain. And the reason is they're sort of in Russia's sphere of influence, so they can innovate. But it's innovation for survival because they're worried that if anybody is ever invaded, that property records will get erased and wiped out. But if it's on a blockchain, it exists forever. So it's a way for them to not only have security, but also sort of chain of title. Also, if anybody here uses Zelle to transfer cash, that's a blockchain. That's a distributed ledger. So sometimes you're using it and you don't even know you're using it.
So, to some of what you're saying, it sounds like for that title thing you guys were talking about, which is my first time hearing it, quite frankly, it sounds like there isn't a good digital solution already in place, and blockchain is something that solves a problem that hasn't really been solved well with digital problems. Are there any problems that are being solved right now through digital means that blockchain technology solves better?
Go for it, please.
For those of you who don't know, so blockchain technology and cryptocurrency in general has a very strong, for better or for worse, libertarian bent. It was sort of founded by a lot of libertarians. A lot of libertarians ran it, and because of that, there are some really interesting projects with a libertarian bent that have practical application. Self-sovereign identity is one of them, and so it's a way for people to prove who they are without having papers. And there are some places that do this now for refugees. So you keep track of who somebody is and where they're at based on, again, a distributed ledger. So it's a way to solve if you're just trying to survive and you're going across a desert with your family and your papers get lost, using that technology is a way to sort of not have it in your hands, and you have biometrics that sort of prove who you are. I think we're going to see more of that as we go forward.
If I could just add on to the identity thing real quick, this is not an issue that affects me directly, but thinking about people who have want to identify as a different gender, let's say, right? In many cases, they have difficulties with the local states or whatever and trying to update that documentation. In a system where you control your own data, where you represent your own identity and say, this is who I am, that becomes a total non-factor, right? You're presenting, this is who I am, this is who I present myself to you. The government can then sign off on that information to say, hey, this person has actually showed up at a government office and shown us that their name is this, and they have proven that they do have driving records. So there's a way to combine these systems so government can sign off on endorsements and so forth, but you can still retain control over your identity in a sovereign way.
So talking about this concept of identity, do you think this is the kind of thing that could replace, single sign-on systems, for example?
I sure hope so, because the existing system online really is bad. I don't know how many passwords you have, Oleg, but I have hundreds.
I'm not going to tell you. That is security. But I can't talk about passwords all day, so I'm going to refrain from that. But just out of curiosity, how many of you work on a product that has some sort of single sign-on aspect to it? Maybe a SaaS platform, that, maybe multi-factor authentication, something of that sort. Okay, so a fair amount of you. So it sounds like that is one way to incorporate blockchain technology.
And actually, Microsoft has been announcing a project out of the Microsoft Identity segment of their corporation. They're working on these DIDs, Decentralized Internet Identity. I forget what the term stands for, but you can Google it. It's a standardized way to represent identity and can start to plug into existing systems. So I don't know about you guys, but Microsoft controls a lot of software in the world last I checked. And if they support something new like these DIDs that work across the internet,
L243, Eric.
then I'm pretty excited about that possibility of like a real world implication of, hey, instead of signing on through Google or Facebook or Twitter where they could shut down my account and lock me out of other things, I can have a self-sovereign identity that does plug into existing systems, but I retain ultimate control over. And I think that's incredibly important.
And is there anyone here who doesn't sign in through Google or Facebook for at least one account? Anyone here who doesn't do that at all? Anyone who refuses to get a Google or a Facebook account? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
We're all beholden to corporate overlords.
So, this is very unlikely to happen. Think of it this way: if Google or Facebook went down, you're not going to have access to a whole lot of things. Like imagine Google went down, you can't even use your email to verify your identity now. So, it's definitely an interesting use case. Any others that you want to talk about?
Actually, I was talking with somebody in this room who shall remain nameless because she said don't call my name out, who is looking for a way to use, again, the supply chain part of blockchain for cannabis. So to track different strands, to track a particular crop to see what amount of mold was in it. Each patient or each user has sort of a specific use profile, and again, with Canada making it legal recreationally, I think there's a lot of use cases there. So it has sort of applications that I don't think a lot of people even foresee. It probably has more problems coming up that we don't foresee, because if you have a system, and again, I'm not the first to say this, but where you build blocks of information on top of one another, you run the risk of not just garbage in, garbage out, it's garbage in, garbage forever. So you also have to be vigilant about that as well.
Yeah, and with that, what are the costs and what are the downsides of blockchain technology? What are some of the downsides?
It's slow. I mean, for a Bitcoin transaction is at 8 seconds? Or 8 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
But Ethereum is better, right?
Ethereum is
faster,
2.3.
but there are other
Yeah.
faster things too.
And if you put Lightning on top of it, that makes things faster. But so blockchain or Bitcoin is 10 minutes to verify a transaction because the nodes have to verify it. MasterCard, 10,000 transactions a second. So it has not caught up. Again, Ethereum, and there are a few other hyperledgers, decentralized ledgers that are faster, but it is a real problem. It does not scale very well.
Yeah, it's not particularly faster or cheaper or anything than you're probably using in a corporate environment. But this whole trust issue is a pretty thorny, tricky thing. When you are handing up, kind of taking the example of like cannabis and going through the supply chain, we're thinking about international shipping, right? There's handoff of goods between different organizations, and who tracks all that data? More importantly, who's responsible for maintaining it? Who has the power to delete it at will? And these things start to fester up into political games between companies operating in an industry, and sometimes within a corporation, you can have business units that are kind of like infighting with each other, right? So if you can help build a better bridge of trust with these kind of shared technologies, it's really this key point is having multiple people writing to this technology that everybody else can read. If you just want to limit the access, so probably a traditional blockchain solution can work best for you. But especially as we work increasingly not face-to-face, there's a bigger opportunity for decentralized technology to help serve us in different ways.
So you spun that negative straight into a positive, but
I'm pretty good at it, huh?
yeah.
Just kidding.
Any other downsides? What about implementation cost?
It's new and expensive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the code is free. It's all open source, but the talent is not free. So you need people who are well versed in it, who have strong security skills, strong coding skills. But the base technology, so ERC20, which is the Ethereum blockchain, I can download on my phone now. But again, making it work for you takes a level of expertise and time that's expensive. Because blockchain as we know it is 10 years old. Like 10 years old in
January?
Coming up in January. So, and again, we can talk all about Satoshi. Okay, good. They got the proper amount of giggles. All you want, but it's 10 years old. Satoshi is the entity.
That was a joke.
I know, but it is the entity that first proposed cryptocurrency tracked in this way. So it's 10 years old. We're in the infancy. We're not even out of the cradle yet.
So regarding that trust relationship problem, are there any specific examples that that either of you know about where that has potentially already come into play?
How much do we want to talk about hard forks? You guys know what hard forks are? So Ethereum had a hard fork how many years ago?
2015, 16.
Yeah, 2016. So there was a software update that basically caused the network to fork. And so now you have Ethereum and you have Ethereum Classic, both of which are traded cryptocurrencies. So whenever there's a glitch, you can have two systems that are mirrors of one another. And there's also a way. They got into the. It wasn't the code, but they got into the layer. So there's a bunch of security things that are not solved yet. Bitcoin itself never been hacked. I don't think Ethereum itself has ever been hacked. It's always been the sort of the protocols in between, the way that nodes and computers themselves sort of talk in between. So that's not fully figured out. Did I over or under answer that question?
Just right.
Okay.
I don't know if this addresses your question, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Go for it.
So I have been on the internet for quite a while now, and I'm finding.
Congratulations.
Thank you. This money on the internet thing, I've been doing a lot of thinking about. Right, we all transact value on the internet, and traditionally we've done this with credit cards, which have never really been a suitable sort of choice for the internet. But I find really interesting, talking about use cases and applications and trying to decide, well, where does this best fit? I think no matter where it does or does not fit, there's a use case for a native value instrument on the internet, like being able to represent pure value, not theoretical debts on a credit card or something like that. I think it's very handy. So much so that when they invented the web and designed the HTTP protocol that governs how we interact with it. I'm sure you've seen this before, but you go to click on a link and you see this HTTP error 404, file not found, right? We see these error codes, 404. There's another error code out there. It's 402, payment required. I find it really interesting that the web pioneers built payment required into the web decades and decades ago. And we've never really figured out how to do this properly until now. Now we have this like blockchain cryptocurrency thing, and even though we're focusing on many applications of it, you go with the presumption that, hey, the internet has this value transfer mechanism built in now, and it's kind of this native protocol. You can actually start to build some really cool things, whether they be microtransactions for platforms that were not possible before because credit card fees, have like 39-cent minimum transaction and all this stuff. So I think there's actually a fair number of internet-based applications of the technology that we haven't really delved into yet, simply because it's so young and people haven't experimented with it in those kinds of crazy different ways yet.
But aren't the blockchain transaction fees that much more expensive than 39 cents? In the sense that your clearance time is there and you've got, or is it only when you transfer into a different currency that matters?
So generally speaking, people in the blockchain industry regard low fees as being a good thing. So if the fee is high, most people will consider that an abnormality that should be corrected. Sometimes it's totally true where the fee can be like $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 to move a lot of money on Bitcoin. And this is innovation area, frankly, for other blockchains to find low-cost solutions to transfer money. So when Bitcoin's really expensive, if you go on Twitter and find your way into the crypto Twitter sphere, you will see kind of the team wars, if you will, of, oh, it's $5 to transfer, it's only a nickel over here. And so this stuff definitely does pop up.
And the other thing, we were talking about credit cards, and there's a great book out called The Age of Cryptocurrency that has actually sort of done this better than I did. But for every transaction on your, so I was just at Starbucks on the corner here, and so my chai latte, from my purchase to when it sort of like hits my credit card statement, 17 different vendors handle that one transaction. So this is a way to innovate past that completely. So no more clearinghouses, no more middlemen. So the cost-benefit analysis of what it wastes and what it uses, again, we're still in the infancy, but that has a ton of applications that we've sort of yet to cash in on.
So regarding this concept of universal value, I mean, I've heard about this thing, and I'm sure everyone here has, about this whole thing. If China has 50% of the world's Bitcoin, they can completely mess with the whole Bitcoin market and screw everyone over. Can you talk about, is that a real thing? Is that a thing that can happen? Is that with Bitcoin or with cryptocurrency or with any kind of blockchain technology? Is it possible for a single party to influence into the blockchain in an unfavorable way?
So yes, but why would you want to? It's one of the things that if you have a whole store of value in Bitcoin, why would you fuck with the system that is storing your value? I mean, it's actually one of the philosophical things that's built in that encourages everyone to behave in a sort of positive, pro-community way. You're not going to destroy something that has half your net worth in it. There is for nodes, there's what's called the 51% problem, and if you own 51% of the computing power, then you can sort of disrupt the ability to reach a consensus on a network. So there are those sort of things that go on, and we've sort of seen this when coins launch and computing power gets moved over. You have seen some sabotage there, but for the bigger things, I'm going to pass it on.
So I think the 51% question is actually a philosophical question of what is truth and reality. And we need a lot more alcohol to really get to the depths of this.
We haven't.
Amazing.
Did you see that fridge? That's amazing.
So the question really is 51% tact. Yeah, we can run the math and the numbers and stuff. But at what point, regardless of technology, if you have a certain amount of people in a room that say, no, actually I don't see the color blue here, I see the color green, at what point does that actually become the reality, right? This gets into a very difficult philosophical thing. So is 51% attack actually a thing, or is it just majority controlling reality? I'm not entirely sure, but it's
It's also about adoption. So a lot of companies would not even contemplate if there is a possibility, even non-zero possibility of someone taking over, right? So a lot of companies
unlike on the market where people can buy shares and do a takeover of the company without their permission, right?
Right.
I mean, it's totally possible and it changes the reality of the situation then.
The US can take over, right? But the US already took over, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and there's one more component to this, and that is, those people who invested in cryptocurrency earlier. And I know we'll get away from cryptocurrency, but those people who invested early and bought early, well, there's a criticism now that those people are playing with house money, because if you bought Bitcoin at $1, you are a gajillionaire now, and so the things that you do, yes, are great for innovation, but it's house money. It is sort of like found money. So it's a criticism I see coming up over and over again, especially when there are stupid projects.
Which I do want to get to. I do want to talk about stupid.
I'm trying not to name any, but
not yet. Come on, hold off for a little bit.
No. I'm trying. Again, because this is the industry I cover. I can't necessarily.
I know.
But
I can.
Yeah, but you can.
I'll wait, but I can do that.
But this concept of a trust relationship, I think that is like when you talk about cryptocurrency. I mean, definitely, at least in the company that I work for, our developers had conversations about cryptocurrency. They kept talking about this concept of, I don't like the fact that some things shouldn't be trusted to so many people. I don't like this fact that you have to trust so many people. I don't like the fact that it's decentralized. Like, what do you have to say to those sorts of arguments?
That's kind of interesting. I have a friend, his name is Bob Somerville, and he is a Canadian bloke who did some talking to people in the blockchain space. And actually, it turns out a lot of us who got attracted to blockchain in general have trust issues, if you will, which is really funny that we would build a protocol for trust, right? So, I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting that they would say that, because the entire point of the system was to bake trust into the code protocol, right? And maybe that doesn't sound so good for the average person, but for a technocrat, to be able to read the code and know exactly what it's supposed to do, and to be guaranteed that's what's going to happen. Kind of going back to the libertarian comment, right? Bitcoin famously has a capped limited supply that was modeled after gold, right? Some people find this very, very helpful as a monetary policy. Some may not. Fortunately, unlike the US dollar, you're not forced to use cryptocurrency. It's an optional system. If you don't like the existing system, you can try out this new thing. And lots of economic experimentation has gone on around that.
All right, moving away from the cryptocurrency, let's talk about what kinds of applications are there for blockchain technology what kind of things is blockchain technology being used for that it shouldn't be used for?
Combining buzzwords. So blockchain and another buzzword, probably not a great fit, I think. When I hear blockchain and AI, I get really, really scared because I do not ever want to build Skynet. So automation of things that can't be changed, that scares me a little bit.
You already used my Skynet joke. Again, there are just some protocols that you just don't need it for. If you have a system that works and you don't need, again, blocks of information that can't be changed, then you don't need it. And it's actually sort of popped into industries that I'd never expected it to be in.
Such as?
So real estate. You are seeing real estate, you're seeing properties sort of digitized and used in ways that I never thought possible. So we all know what timesharers are, right? So what if you could take the value of an apartment building and you own not just the building, but you own, a piece of that building as sort of represented in your securitized token. So it's a way to, the other sort of revolution for blockchain technology is it's infinitely divisible. So you can take it and you can chop it up any way you like. So it's it's something I never thought I would see, but I'm seeing more and more people get into real estate using blockchain technology because it's a way for them to not only store a chain of title, chain of ownership, but it's a way for people to own apartments and oceanfront property and land parcels in a really sort of frictionless way. It's been really, really interesting to see that.
Yeah, one area that I think actually people think there's a great use for blockchain, but it actually turns out to be a lot harder than reality, or a lot harder in reality, rather, is when people try to tokenize even another commodity, not something unique like real estate, but say you want a token to represent a diamond or a gram of gold or something like that. It sounds really nice to have this tracking ability, but the blockchain does not move things in the physical world, nor when physical things are moved in the real world does the blockchain automatically get updated, right? Somebody actually still has to connect this, and there's still this gray zone of like a human involved in the process. We can get towards automation and stuff, but I think actually this is a false trap for a lot of people where they try to say, hey, I'm going to just like tokenize, I'm going to make a token for every brick in the building, and then I can do all these crazy things. It's not going to really realistically change the tracking of those things. You might get yourself into trouble if you're trying to tokenize and sell things as securities. Sidestepping laws is not really a good application of blockchain technology, but blockchain is digital and it works on the internet. So tracking digital goods on the internet is a really good use case because you can automatically move things on the internet that you can't do in the real world. So if you want to track a digital collectible online, CryptoKitties, has anybody heard of CryptoKitties? Yeah? They're little digital collectibles that are like Pokemon things you can go capture and buy and breed and make new ones and sell those. It's really cool. I didn't play with it a lot myself, but it's a thing. Blockchain is actually good for this because it enforces a uniqueness, and if the company shuts down, your digital cat still exists. Your cat doesn't go away just because the company goes away. I think that's a really cool thing.
So it's interesting you say that because I think both of you mentioned logistics as an actual good application for blockchain technology. So when you say logistics as a good application for blockchain technology, what do you mean there? If you're saying it shouldn't be used for tracking of physical goods like gold or diamond, what kind of logistics are you talking about then?
I do think, and if you want to jump in, let me know. I do think there is an application in logistics when you have many entities that don't necessarily trust each other that have to cooperate around some shared goal, right? So getting some ore from the ground and all the way to the end of some metal or jewelry, all the handoffs that happen, blockchain can serve a need to coordinate the parties and sidestep the whole issue of who owns the database, who maintains it, and what happens when they screw up. Well, guess what? We don't have to manage that anymore because we share the database together.
Yeah, no, I think there are a couple of companies trying to do diamonds because now you can laser identify diamonds with codes inside the cut.
Yeah.
So there are more and more people that are doing that, but it's not automated yet. Again, it's the garbage in, garbage out problem. Did you guys see a few years ago Walmart actually put for its inventory, sort of barcodes on everything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my phone's dying, and that's where I have the Slido questions.
That's all right. And it was to not necessarily track theft. It was to track what was called in-house shrinkage. You guys know what that is? Where employees rip you off. So they were trying to find a way around that by sort of installing sensors in all of the loading docks. So nothing like that exists for blockchain yet. Like there's no sort of like loading dock scanner. So it's just more area for innovation, I think.
So of the use cases that both of you mentioned, which ones do you think are the most have the most promising future, cryptocurrency aside?
Well, I mean, just the ones.
I mean, it's speculation at this point. Like,
okay,
honestly,
well,
but,
I mean, but things
feel
like
free to speculate.
yeah, but things like Zelle that already runs on Quorum, like you're already seeing real world application of that sort of stuff. Things I would like to see. I think there are a bunch of companies trying to do the self-sovereign identity, and that is not just like a theoretical the problem, and it's not necessarily even identifying who you are. It's identifying information about yourself. So it's giving you control over this Facebook problem that we have. That people can hack Facebook and they know all this stuff about you. So having a sovereign identity allows you not to wall off your data, but what data to share when. That I think is really, really important, and I'm really curious to see how that and where that goes.
Yeah, I hate to steal your answer here, but I agree. The thing that I'm most excited for is the self-sovereign identity, the capability of plugging into existing systems and retaining that control. I think will enable us to retain control of all the other data that we put out on the internet. When we sign up for these services, we sign away our digital lives. And I think finally we have the opportunity to kind of regain control of our digital lives. And as much as we might want to implement this technology in other areas of our lives, for me, if we improve the internet, that's a pretty big win all on its own.
Yeah, so we have another question from the audience, and I think this is an interesting one. You say that the blockchain technology is open source. There's a question about how secure is it? So, because it's open source.
Yeah. So
and I know exactly why Taylor is smiling. So Taylor, why don't you take this one?
What is the quote? So with sufficient eyes, all bugs are shallow or something, fixable. I don't remember.
Yeah.
The more people who see it, the easier it is to fix problems. Like we see that in working on projects and stuff. I think. So in theory, if more people read the stuff, they can find the problems. But that doesn't always work out in practice.
So I think the question is more centered around the idea. Like, look, if, for example, if someone were to find the source code of the software that my company makes, in theory, they could use that information to find loopholes and exploit, and then use those loopholes to get into our system. I think that's where the question comes from. If the source code is out there for everyone to see, and there's this big infrastructure built on that source code, why doesn't that make it less secure?
Yeah, so here's the counterpoint to this is if the source code is not available, there can never necessarily be known if there are problems, right? The NSA harbors tons and tons of exploits against our own software creators in our own country, right? Citizens have exploits against their software that the government knows and harbors, and they don't do anything about that. They save it to exploit. Well, guess what? If we can exploit it, other nations can exploit it. I think this is a huge, huge mistake. So whether it's more or less secure, I don't necessarily know or care. I believe the software is more secure because more people have seen it. But it's really scary when these systems are closed down and we have no recourse to fix it. What if we discover a problem? You depend upon that other company to fix it. With open source software, to some degree that's mitigated because anybody can contribute.
Yeah, and I sort of have like a journalist take on this, which is, sunshine anesthetizes everything. So that's a sort of an open records policy as well. So if you're transparent about how something works, then it serves the greater good.
Okay, so kind of moving on a little bit. Let's say you're interested in building technology on a blockchain. What should be step one? How do you get started in that? And maybe let's say you can't get the expertise from outside. How do you start building blockchain expertise within an organization?
Is it okay to plug my own agency?
Go for it.
Yeah. So call me. Find me. Token agency. So token.agency. So first, and we've already said this. Figure out if you actually need a blockchain. So step one is again, it's not going to solve your problem. Talk to 20 people to see if it actually is going to be a solution that's valuable to you, because you're never going to get the time back that you sink into it. Or see if there's a solution that's already out there that you can either partner with or you can employ. So I think that's step one. And even though you can download the code on your phone, it doesn't do you any good unless you have expertise. So that's step two.
And go for it. No, if you have anything to add.
Oh, the second part of that was like how to build expertise within the organization. And I think this is a funny problem, actually. I don't actually have an answer. It's just more of talking. I read an article recently, actually The New Yorker. There's an article about Ethereum and some stuff in there, really good. And there's an employee from a company called Consensus, and they talk about how after a while, you kind of just like step through a window or a door, whatever the metaphor you want to use. You just like step through the door and you look back and you're like, oh, I understand all this stuff now. I don't know why people are doing it the old crappy way. And I don't know what that like veil is, like what cult action we are like instilling upon people. But there's some point where you just cross a threshold and you're like, oh my goodness, it all makes sense, it all clicks, it all connects, and I don't know how to kind of get people there faster. There's like this natural learning process that seems to just take a few months. So I don't know that there's any silver bullet, but it's interesting and important to, I think, get to that point where you have at least one champion in your organization who's like drank the Kool-Aid, if you will, and can be the champion of that project, just like you would with any other project. You want someone who's going to kind of carry that forward.
So one person from the audience asked a question that I completely forgot to ask you about, and that's energy consumption. You know, it seems to be pretty specific to how Bitcoin is verified, but you have this big issue of energy consumption where a bunch of energy is used to mine Bitcoin. Is all blockchain technology like that? Is that going to be the future where we're going to have to find more energy efficient ways of doing things just so we can sustain all this cryptocurrency and the blockchain technology uses?
So there is, thanks for the perfect setup. There is basically what happens behind the scenes to make Bitcoin work. It's called proof of work. It's fine. It's a really innovative system. It makes the whole thing buzz and work. The downside is it takes a lot of energy, and it's starting to become so much so that it is equaling the size of small nations, right? The environment's precious to us. We only have one Earth that we know of so far, so let's preserve what we have here. People are attempting to solve this. There are other consensus algorithms. They're all different proof of something that are not proof of work. And people are trying to solve this problem, don't necessarily have the silver bullet solution. One of the big ones is called proof of stake, and the idea is to achieve a similar level of security without all the wasteful energy expenditure. And in a nutshell, they call it virtualized mining. So mining takes capital costs of a box that you plug into the wall and then the electricity each month. If you take the capital of the box and just lock it into like a safety box that can't be unlocked, you can achieve a similar kind of security threshold because it's about the money invested into the system that secures it. Kind of an overarching thing that proof of stake attempts to achieve, but it all happens on the blockchain itself and doesn't require you to have this extra computer plugged into the wall processing energy needlessly.
Yeah, and I know we're jumping around here, but just to clarify some of this trust stuff a bit, not everyone need have access to every single blockchain out there.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't need to be.
And I think that's something I want to clarify. If your company wants to build software, blockchain doesn't necessarily mean the whole world is going to have access to it.
Yeah, you don't need to be a node. A node is what your computer is called if you're a member of the blockchain community or the Ethereum community. So you don't need to have a node or to be a node in order to operate this way. In terms of the amount of energy it takes, there are several solutions out there that are innovating that. They're trying to sort of address it in different ways. So it's one of the things that I'm not really worried about. It seems to be sort of a boogeyman that keeps coming up. But I think as the industry matures, they'll figure out a more eco-friendly way. What was your first one? Right.
Yeah, and then just a note on if you want to use blockchains internally in your organization, like private blockchains, there are other consensus algorithms. The popular one to use in that scenario is proof of authority. So it's actually a more traditional system. You just say, hey, there's 7 people involved, and we assume that when 4 of the 7 or 5 of the 7, whatever your threshold is, when they have signed cryptographically, then we consider it finalized and valid, right? And for a system where you have a modicum of trust, like a little bit, you know who that person is, the system actually works pretty well. It's pretty fast relative to old school blockchain. But yeah, the proof of work system is really, really important when you don't have any trust at all. That's when that becomes super, super critical.
And it's also, one more time, it's also super wasteful. Like the people who talk about, well, what mining is it's your computer solving a complex algorithm and then you compete for that. At this point, it's not even that. It's a whole bunch of computers just shouting answers at one another. So it's tremendously wasteful. And we're talking about huge terabytes of information per second. So it is wasteful, but it's competitive. And I think, again, a ton of innovation will go to be solving that.
So one other question related to blockchain use within an organization. How is making software on blockchains different? And just to dive into that question a little bit more. I don't mean like the technology itself. I mean, are there any vastly different considerations that need to be taken into account when making blockchain technology beyond just getting all the code and making it work? Maybe things like infrastructure, things potentially involving marketing, things like security. If your security is going to be one, things like operations.
So I think, to a large degree, many of those things are easier. The marketing sells itself today, for better or worse. The infrastructure requirements theoretically are less because you're sharing those. But I've forgotten the question now that I was doing my prelude of the
Differences between that and traditional development.
Oh, right. So when you launch a smart contract, and we haven't really talked about this term, but when you launch a smart contract onto the blockchain, it's like launching a rocket into space. You can't just go back and get that thing. Like whatever you sent out there into space, it's out there. It's on the blockchain. It's immutable. You cannot change the terms of the contract after the fact. And that, when you're dealing with money, is really, I don't want to say dangerous, but you have to be very, very careful what you're doing. Otherwise, you can end up losing tons of money.
I was going to say, and I want to backtrack a little bit on smart contracts, because it's one of the things that makes Ethereum in particular, that's the sort of the upshot of using the ERC20 protocol, is you can build an app on top of it. So what Ethereum is trying to do and trying to provide is a place where you can build apps on top of that software.
Yeah, and I'm just going to cut in here. We do have questions about Ethereum, and I'll get to those. But I want to focus on what you just said about you being able to lose a ton of money when the terms can change. I mean, are there any examples you can give of that, or are there specific cases?
Go ahead.
So the DAO, this was the hard fork that you were talking about a little bit earlier. What led to this hard fork scenario? Never mind what it is. What led to this was a bunch of people putting all their money together in a smart contract they called the DAO. DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. The idea is basically you can replicate the back office functionality of a corporation or nonprofit, any entity, on a blockchain. That was the theoretical implementation of it. Turns out, when there's a bug in the code, there was no way to go back and kind of say, oops, we made a mistake, we meant to do it this way. And the consequence of that was a bunch of money got drained from the DAO. Now, at the time, just to give you an idea of how much a bunch of money is, the value was nearly $250 million, $250 million, and no one could step in and say, hey, wait a minute, shut it all down, we need to pause the accounts, check things out. It wasn't possible. So that kind of is like an issue. That's a lot of money, and regulators would certainly be upset if all that money was lost.
Yeah, except they did. They updated the code.
Well, yes, that is true.
They hit it. So this is way too geeky. But yeah, but they hit a reset button. It's just that you ended up with a mirrored system, a hard fork.
We forced a bug in there, and that bug will always live on in the code because we had to create a special exception for that one instance.
Yeah, and so for project managers, smart contracts are great because they create an if this then that scenario. So if rent is due and it's paid on time, then this credit is applied. Or we were talking before about title companies. You eliminate the entitled company industry if you evolve into blockchain. So the if this then that ability for smart contracts to govern transactions, and not only transactions but pieces of transactions, that I think is what we're going to see more of.
Yeah, so kind of getting to the whole trust thing a little bit, and the smart contracts kind of bridge these ideas. I apologize for talking about value transfer, because it kind of touches on cryptocurrency, but it's a simple example.
I mean, I knew who you were when I...
So a really popular example of smart contracts is a replacement for escrow services. If you're not familiar, escrow services, you put your money in, they hold on to it, make sure everything's good, and then release the money to the appropriate party. There's usually a fee for this. It's not a big deal. Smart contracts can replicate that functionality for basically a penny or whatever the transaction cost is. You send your cryptocurrency to the smart contract, it locks it up, it waits for a set of conditions to be true. Maybe you bought a good from somebody and they are shipping it. When the proof is submitted that the good has shipped and been delivered, the smart contract can say, yes, I see the proof. I am now going to release these funds to this person. Or if it doesn't go that way, they'll hold on to the funds because the item never arrived, or there could be an arbitration scenario which happens. So yeah, this is just like one tiny example of what a smart contract could do that replaces some existing functionality in our society.
But you almost always, usually the overhead in those existing systems is because of the back door for arbitration and human interaction. And so if you create a smart contract that doesn't have that, it's almost always going to turn into a Dow horseshit scenario where it goes nuclear. And so you end up creating like, oh, it's smart except for the 1% where we have to have a backdoor for human intervention, at which point, and then we need to add an extra 10% on to cover that process, and so it becomes identical to the existing system, almost, doesn't it?
That may be theoretically true. I'm not going to debate that point.
The percentages of would be very low.
Okay. I think actually there's a
But
huge...
I like horseshit scenario in any of this.
So I think actually one area that we might have a lot of innovation that we have not prepared for is a lot of people have thought about contracts in the human using contract sense, but there's this whole class of users of the internet that's growing called robots, chatbots, whatever, and they will likewise need value transfer mechanisms and the ability to operate in ways that humans do. So in the end, maybe it turns out that smart contracts are the digital equivalent for robots online that we humans have for wet ink kind of contracts. Don't know, future kind of like just opining. But if robots do end up doing a lot of transfer of value online for us, they act much quicker than we do. So the loss of money would be much, much higher. I would imagine actually the economy would start to grow quite rapidly if we get an automation along the value transfer dimensions.
And I have one little small thing.
Sure.
So the other horseshit scenario, because I love that now, it is making sure that people understand what's in a contract. So what's in a smart contract. So there's still always going to need to be a human element unless you have a smart contract that has. Did you guys see Intolerable Cruelty in this movie? It's a Coen Brothers film. There's it's George Clooney. He's a guy who makes an airtight divorce contract. It has a name. Like it's that solution. So if you come up with smart contracts that are so solid that they just say, oh, I have a Smith 24. Like, oh, it becomes shorthand for something that is involatile, that is stable, that people trust. So I think that's another thing, because it'll become shorthand for all of these things that we agree on, and it's been solid and it's been proved.
Interesting. So there's a question down here. I don't really understand it, but what's the state of the blockchain of the serverless ecosystem? Who asked that question? Can you raise your hand? Are you willing to? Yeah.
Is there like an AWS of blockchain, or besides Oracle blockchain?
Yeah, there are a couple of services that are doing things. I know for Ethereum specifically, because I know that the best, there's a service called Infura.io, and that basically gives you API endpoints to all the things that you'd expect to run against your local software. So if you develop against locally, swap out the endpoint, and you basically have blockchain as a service in some sense. There are other services being built on top, but that's like one of the most straightforward kind of like API call for API call kind of interface. And if you download the extension called MetaMask for your browser, Google Chrome and Brave and all this stuff, it actually uses Infura behind the scenes so that you do not have to download the entire blockchain. So some of these do exist.
So we have a question. What is the current biggest use case for Ethereum? How big is it really? And actually, who asked that question? Because it sounds like someone's looking to pick a fight. Is anyone gonna raise their hand? Over there.
And what's the market cap?
That guy over there. You're looking at that guy right over there. When you answer the question, how big is it really? What's the biggest use case?
In 10 years, not forever.
So I think the smart contract is going to be the big advantage. Whether it's Ethereum itself or it's a competitor, whether there's.
Well, we're talking about Ethereum.
I know, but I think philosophically, what Ethereum is, there are enough competitors now that it could be Ethereum-like, but it could replace them. So, but I also, again, embracing cryptocurrency a little bit. Ether is the native currency on Ethereum, and more people use Ether to buy things than Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is the store of value, so gold, but when people transact, they use Ether. So, it's one of those things that I'm seeing more and more and more, that people want to hold on to Bitcoin, but they spend Ether. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense.
So, I mean, definitely a big use case today, like it or not, is the organization of value, which we call cryptocurrency. Raising funds, doing this whole ICO thing, like it or not, it is how people have chosen to use the technology for this first wave. And I think it's an extension of what we saw with Kickstarter and GoFundMe. And actually, there was a project built on Bitcoin before Ethereum existed. The guy Mike Hearn, who was written about in the New York Times newspaper, different from New Yorker magazine, about how he left Bitcoin. But one of the things that he did was he tried to write a decentralized application, smart contract style, for Bitcoin. It's called Lighthouse, and the purpose was to collect funds together to coordinate amongst a project. So I really find it not all that surprising that ICOs were a big methodology. It's kind of the stupid obvious thing, not stupid that's bad, but it's blindingly stupid. So I have money, you have money, we can put our money together. Okay, yeah, let's try that. So I think we got that first use case. And now it seems like the use case on Ethereum feels like actually protocol development around ERC20, which is tokens that are interoperable. So I can change my token and use it in a different wallet and it all kind of knows each other. 721, ERC 721 is digital collectibles like CryptoKitties, I think. 725 is identity, and then there's all these standard numbers, and they're starting to build out basically standard ways to interoperate these systems without having to force them and say, you must use this protocol. As long as it talks the same language, we can actually build these systems that work all online together rather than being inside of the data.
Yeah. And I looked it up really quickly, so if you guys want to know how big it is. So Bitcoin market cap is 112.5 billion. Ethereum is 21 billion. Ripple is about
Scam?
18 billion.
By the way, I think we had a question here about what cryptocurrency not to invest in. I think this guy just answered your question, so I guess we can check that one off the list.
Ripple's not actually a scam. The XRP token is used as a spam prevention mechanism on the network and does not convey any value of what is being transacted.
Since you're looking up, what's the value of Dogecoin? I'm really heavily invested in Dogecoin.
So for those of you who don't know, Dogecoin started as a joke.
It
is super valuable now. I mean, just the amount that it has, the store of or the community in which it is used, and the way the value has grown has been incredible. And again, it started as a joke and as a meme, and it was used to tip people. And now the market cap on it is.
I know it's several billion.
No, it's $500,000.
Okay.
No, it's not $500,000.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's not that much.
It's $500 million. So,
okay, yeah, so pennies, got it.
515 million.
Yeah. So another interesting question is, how will regulations like GDPR affect, blockchain technology? And I'm sure we can talk about regulations all day, because depending on what the government says, they can shut down anything. But how will regulations affect it?
So they can't shut it down. That's actually the big thing. So sorry.
Yeah.
They can't, because it's decentralized and it's international. So governments cannot. In New York, you had the Bitcoin license. All that did was chase innovation out. So I think in the last 5 years, 4, maybe 5 Bitcoin licenses have been granted. So, depending on which branch of government you talk to, the IRS says that digital assets, especially Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's property. It's something you have to pay capital gains tax on. We have not, as the U.S., figured out how to categorize a digital asset. So I think there's still room to grow there, but also we're, as a nation, losing out. I mean, I think Japan has figured this out. They just, they figured out the regulation, and I think they're sort of more open about it. China has shut it down completely, but there are 20 loopholes you can go through in China. But it's not something that the government can regulate, because it has been built to not fall to one nation.
Right. want to answer that?
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects of GDPR I think that might have an impact to blockchain. One is this like theory of like governments will say, oh, there's some personally identifiable data and it's shared and you got to take it down and blah blah blah, which we've discussed the censorship aspect. It's anti-censorship principles, so it's hard to shut down. On the other hand, there's the side of like, man, all my data is being scraped by all these large entities. I'm not being told about it. They're selling it and earning revenue. And actually, has anybody here heard of or used the browser called Brave? Brave browser? Okay. So for those of you not familiar, it's like Google Chrome in a sense, but they add in extra privacy protections. The guy who built Brave, Brandon Ike, was the inventor of Netscape, like the first browser, and also JavaScript, which is the lingua franca of the web. So he's, got some sway. He is actually, I think, going about trying to sue some of these companies under the premise of GDPR and say actually they are no longer compliant with their advertising behavior. Of course, he has a business reason to do this, but I don't necessarily disagree with him either. I think in the end result, actually, it could be better for self-sovereign data, where you own your own identity, own your own data, and you choose what information to give out. That's the kind of internet I want to live on.
So I'm hearing you guys say two different things on the subject. I'm hearing you say governments wouldn't, but also governments can't. Which is it? Is it one, the other, is it both?
Well, I can't. I mean, it's too big. You can stop innovation. You can stop new things from being built, like the New York, the Bitcoin license. But for things that exist already, that are international and that are decentralized, they can't. There's not like a server farm they can go and shut down because blockchains are specifically designed to ward against that. That's actually an advantage that we haven't talked about. Especially for those of you and for everybody here in product development, is that if you have a single point of failure, it doesn't go away because as long as it's on one computer, it's on every computer. So it's another layer. And again, I think we will get there. But anybody who watched the Mark Zuckerberg in front of Congress explaining to congressmen what Facebook is. Okay, try to put anybody to explain to them what cryptocurrency is. So you 10x your problem. So we will get there, but just 10. I'm being optimistic. But I think I've over-answered the question.
That was a good answer.
If you want proof about the ability to not be censored, look at BitTorrent. The same peer-to-peer protocol that powers BitTorrent, it's called Kademlia protocol. That is what underlies the peer-to-peer nature of blockchains. If BitTorrent still exists, blockchains cannot be shut down.
So related to that question, what countries or zones are right now most friendly for blockchain and token development? I'm assuming Switzerland.
Switzerland's a good one.
Japan.
I don't actually know too much of this.
Yeah. Japan has at least the cryptocurrency part of it figured out, but also there's a lot of small countries. So Malta, they call it Crypto Island. So there's a ton of LLCs out of Malta. I was telling a friend this, and he says, "Yeah, it's the sunny island where people go to do shady things." and I was like, "Well, yeah." But there's a lot of stuff there, and again, really strange. Like you wouldn't think like Eastern Bloc countries like Estonia. They are countries that are more in the former. I was going to say it's not Yugoslavia anymore. It is
Czech Republic.
Czech.
No.
Slovakia.
Slovakia.
Croatia, yeah. So those places, they're doing really interesting things. But people go to Malta, they go to Switzerland. Again, Japan has the money side figured out. I'm trying to think of where else we've reported.
I mean, in general, Europe. In general, I'd say Europe's slightly more than slightly friendly as compared with the United States. The United States has so lack of clarity, and the lawmakers, as you're saying, they just can't make heads or tails of it because they're old and out of touch. So it's just like kind of nerve-wracking to do much of anything here with fear of like, is it a token or is it a security? Isn't it a security? If I do a token, well, is it a utility token different than a currency token? And we can't even get these basic things answered. So inventing new protocols where I don't actually know what the token is until after the fact and it's in the rearview mirror, that scares me as an innovator. It scares me to Europe. That's what it does.
So a couple more questions just to close things out. What's the current bleeding edge of the technology itself? What kind of research level work is being done to advance blockchain technology itself? Maybe not necessarily applications, but the actual foundation.
So from a core technological perspective, the big thing is scaling, which can take a lot of forms, but scaling more transactions per second through the use of a few different techniques. One's called sharding, where they like split it up into different pieces, and then the question is like, how do you get all those pieces?
With a D, right?
Sharding?
Yeah.
Sharding.
Okay.
Sharding. Sharding, where you kind of like figure out how to split it up a little bit and then like put it back together. Another thing that's a little bit further off, but the research is kind of like moving forward. Something else that's still kind of research phase, but transitioning to actually implementation is these so-called layer 2 solutions. And that's where you kind of offload some of the transactions from the blockchain itself. You kind of batch them up off a separate communications channel elsewhere. And you just kind of reconcile them all eventually to the blockchain. So some controversy on this. I'm of the opinion that if it's not on the blockchain, it's not a blockchain transaction. It does eventually make it there in a sense. So, kind of depends on how you view it. But growing the transaction capability of the networks is the #1 priority of everybody, or it should be. But it's further off currently today. Layer 2 networks is kind of where everybody's excited to like, oh, the code's actually starting to get out there a little bit. So.
There's all that kind of stuff. There's also weird like political things happening, like Myanmar. There's a sort of a place in Myanmar that is near the Chinese border that is now sort of flirting with its own sort of blockchain and its own cryptocurrency in a way to sort of make transaction on a village level. But I'm really excited about things like Lightning. So Lightning is something that sits on top of blockchain and makes it faster. I think that's the rock we have to push up the hill until it's not a rock anymore.
All right.
And by the way, if anybody has any questions that you don't want to ask, I will hang around. We will hang around. We'll hang around. We'll hang around.
Thank you, Taylor.
We'll hang around a little bit.
There's
and chat with you.
alcohol, okay?
All right.
See, that always works. So, and I'm just going to do one more question from here, and then I'm actually going to take a few questions with raised hands. This is a fun one. I don't know if you guys want to answer this one, but people want to know, what crypto are you guys invested in and why?
I have a heavy bias towards Ethereum because I helped make that. So I was obviously in Bitcoin beforehand. I still have that, and I dabble in a few other things. I think Dash is really interesting from a governance perspective. Trying to think what else. And then there's a couple of Ethereum projects I'm interested in, like Golem and things like that. So some of this is like projects on top of projects.
So the interesting thing about this question is when you answer it, are you then advocating? Are you providing?
I mean, you could answer both. You say, yes, I'm invested in it, and I wish I wasn't. That could be an answer.
It's too late.
Yeah, so I tend not to do that, just because, again, I'm trying to sort of be neutral and tell people.
Sure.
But I do keep sort of a minimal amount in Coinbase, which is now has a local office.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, just so I can see, their tech is here, right? It's their tech office.
I've heard rumblings. I don't know officially.
Yeah, it's their So the Crane's wrote about them in the last year, but it's a lot of their tech services. But I do keep $20 or not. I keep $80 in the top 4 currencies, just so I can see how things have gone up and down since January. So I have a sort of like a consumer look into those, and so instead of figuring out like, okay, how is the industry doing, I just open that and I'm like, oh, that's not $80 anymore. That's how it's my reality check.
Yep. And I know there were a lot of questions about, what blockchain technology I invest in, what, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this whole conversation has been about, here's what blockchain technology is, here's the applications of it. Like, I don't know what more some of you want. Like, I mean.
What more do you want, people?
Yeah. What do you want, Taylor? What should people invest in? Give us some investment advice.
Invest in yourself.
We have a question. We have a question over here. I don't think this is working anyway. Oh wait, like there. Okay.
One of the things that I've been trying to kind of piece apart as you're talking is the difference between blockchain as a technology technology and business models that are enabled by the blockchain. What are some ways to help think about that a little more clearly?
So I think you just have to parse it into what industry you're talking about. So it's hard to say, where it can be applied if you're not being industry specific.
So let me give you a personal example. I work for a company called NMI. They're in the payment space. Credit card processing, online transactions. One of the bigger problems and one of the areas that there's opportunities in the industry is fraud prevention. Card spinning is the thing that card spinning, which is when they get a bunch of credit card numbers and they try them all out until one works, is a big thing. And fraudsters are finding new and more clever ways of impersonating people without getting any kind of rules. And while there's a machine learning aspect of it, some unique identity would definitely be a field for it. So if blockchain technology were more advanced, that would be something that probably our company would be considering doing, that using blockchain technology as a way to minimize fraud. So I think this conversation in general is about blockchain as a solution to problems. And hopefully, our panelists so far have kind of articulated the problems that blockchain technology can and cannot solve. Because it's not a thing in and of itself. It's not like, I don't know, that ottoman right there. It's a means to an end as opposed to a thing. But you guys generally
there's no blockchain pixie dust. You just can't sprinkle it over something and it's going to solve. But again, if you're in supply chain, then great. It's got all sorts of solutions for that. If you're looking for something that has smart contracts for real estate or for any other sort of digital asset, great. But if you're looking at it to solve doggy daycare, and actually,
or the blockchain restaurants.
Yeah. No, I guarantee you right now.
That is the thing, by the way. Look it up.
Yeah. I guarantee you, at the moment I said that, there was a startup that just started doing doggy daycare. .com. Yeah. And actually, I actually think so. In the blockchain space on the internet, the extension is usually .io. That's usually what you see for a lot of crypto and a lot of blockchain. I think the next generation will be more blockchain specific extensions. I think, .block or whatever. I think that will sort of open up not only new brands, but new ways and new communities. So.
Can I just mention real quick on that?
Yeah.
Somewhat technical use case, but very important that we all use and hardly ever think about. When you type in a domain name on your browser, it gets resolved to an IP address that points you to a server.
Yeah.
They've actually tried to rebuild that on blockchain a couple of times, and there's an Ethereum version called ENS. It's super interesting. And now what's really cool is there's a .xyz or XYZ domain name that mirrors and actually provides the ENS stuff as exposed to old school HTTP web. And it's wow, we're really starting to get bridges between these technologies and starting to see interplay between them. And yeah, it's a use case even if we're not as aware of it.
Yeah, I remember I read some articles about Google trying to do away with URLs.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's our whole business model.
So I'm going to take one question from the audience. Can raise hands. Anyone have one final question? That guy right there.
What do you guys think of the Petro?
Petro, the Venezuelan.
Currency does. So the Venezuelan cryptocurrency is trying to circumvent U.S. sanctions.
I don't know very much about it. I am all for moving towards blockchain-based value transfer methods. If they are trying to use it to go around U.S. sanctions, then that's their choice, I guess.
I was going to say that there are already use cases that people use it called Bitcoin. People.
Anyone ever heard of the Silk Road here?
Yeah, but it's not even that. It's a store of value for people in places that have unstable currency. So you see it in Brazil and Greece. You see that a lot. I was trying to think of the other sort of use case for this, but no, it's nothing new. People have used blockchain to sort of protect assets since it became somewhat mainstream. So.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you. Before we all disperse and start talking, a few housekeeping items. Number one, who here is actively looking for a product management position or something in that space? Anyone here? Right. Yeah, raise your hand because it's going to be important. Who here is hiring product managers or product management tangentially related? All right, take a look over there. So as soon as we close out, you can talk to each other. That's a big thing in these networking events. Another thing is, our November event will be focusing on early stage product managers. We're going to have a panel of a few early stage but successful product managers that will answer questions about how to get into the space. It's not easy to get into if you're not already there, and when you're there, a lot of companies are sort of unstructured when it comes to their product management organization. So if that's something you find interesting, if you yourself are building product management organizations and want to figure out the do's and do nots of how to start a team, or if you are looking to figure out how do I get into this whole product management thing, definitely come. We've got a few cool speakers. I think we have one who started recently at Google or at Amazon. So, and I've heard that it's a very hard place to get into. Another thing is that can the Tri-PBA organizers please raise your hand one more time? If there is something that you think we could be doing better at these events, especially if this is your first time, this is really your first impression of it, please tell one of us. We're always looking to improve and make these events more useful.
Are you looking for more volunteers to help run the organization?
Why, thank you, Eric. Yes, we are always looking for more volunteers to help out. So if this is something you get involved in, we say that about 2 hours a week is what we would like. If you could commit 2 hours a week and just be present consistently. We have a Slack channel. Definitely let me know. We're always looking for people to do more things. It helps when there's more Tri-PMA organizers at events, kind of helping to coordinate things. Finally, once again, I wanted to thank our hosts at Orange for having us. This is a great space. A round of applause for them, please. And that's the show. I dropped the mic, but these things look a little bit expensive. I don't want to be liable for them. Thanks.